Let's do that hockey.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of DobberProspects Radio. I'm your host, still Peter Harling. This is going to be episode 116, and the march on going through the team's top 10 prospects continues. This episode is going to focus on the Florida Panthers, who, despite being one of the top teams in the league, has a pretty good prospect pool to talk about. Bringing in a support pinch hitter for this episode is the DobberProspects Florida Panthers prospect expert, none other than Ben Gehrels. Ben, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it's
My
good to
first
have
podcast.
Your first podcast. Well, no one can see this, but I'm looking at you on our Zoom call here, and you've got a pretty fancy mic, so you had me fooled. Ben also does the Tampa Bay Lightning prospects for DobberProspects, and he writes the Journey for Dobber as well. So he knows all about the Florida prospects and fantasy hockey. So appreciate your time again, Ben.
No problem.
All right, so let's start talking Florida Panthers prospects. And I like to start off before we just dive into the players. I like to kind of do like an overview of where the team's at. And as I mentioned off the top, the Florida Panthers are one of the best teams in the league. They're a Stanley Cup contender. They've got a really nice young team. That's one of the things I like about them. And their roster is dominated by the 2014 draft. You've got Ekblad, Reinhart, Bennett, who are 1, 2, and 4, I believe, overall in that draft. They've accumulated all those players. They've got Huberdeau, Barkov, Ekblad as the core of the team with a really nice, deep supporting cast. They've got some really nice prospects, and we were talking before I hit the record button about some of the guys who have come onto this roster kind of seemingly out of nowhere and made an impact. What do you think about some of those guys, like Mason Marchment, for example?
Yeah, it was really hard to read the situation for the Panthers, especially the prospects coming into the year. It seemed like there were just a number of players competing for not very many spots. When Thornton was in the picture, and they seemed really deep down the middle. Mason Marchment, I think he's a little bit older, and he didn't seem to have too much fantasy appeal at all. I was kind of discounting him, and he's come out of nowhere, and he's having a fantastic season. Seems like he's getting really great chemistry with, in particular, Lundell and Reinhart, which we can get into a little bit later with Lundell.
Yeah, I mean, all he's done is be a point-a-game player, which is pretty spectacular. He's 26 years old. He's undrafted. And, I know him a little bit from his time with the Marlies. And, he's just he's a late bloomer, I think is safe to say. He's a compete hard kind of player, and he's got a decent skill set that's just continued to get better and better season after season. And, when you're not drafted and you're signed as a free agent and you come out of the Ontario Hockey League where he played for a couple of seasons, he bounced around there too. He played 50 games for Erie, 30 games for Hamilton, and 27 games for Mississauga. Then he's playing for the Marlies and bounced between there and the ECHL for his first season. And then he's just been getting more and more confident as he goes, but really kind of a middling AHL player. He's like a half a point a game guy with the Marlies in the American Hockey League. And he was there when the Marlies were Calder Cup contenders. So they're a pretty deep team, and he was one of their good but not best players. And ever since he's gone to Florida, he's just been kind of lights out good this season. So good on him. You never know when you're going to get one of those late bloomers that's kind of come out of nowhere for you.
Yeah, it's very reminiscent of what Carter Verhaeghe did last year.
Yeah, for sure.
And also the resurrection of Sam Bennett. I don't know what this team is doing, but they're really getting the most out of their players here.
Yes, I could talk all day about Sam Bennett. As the diehards for this podcast will know, I've been a big fan of his, and I was really glad to see him come out of Calgary. I like Calgary a lot, but I just don't think he was being deployed accurately there. And
absolutely.
Before he was traded, he was in all kinds of trade rumors. I remember posting on Twitter that the Leafs should make an offer for him, and they should offer Travis Dermott and a draft pick and see if that's enough to get him. And you always put yourself out there when you talk about trade rumors or suggestions on Twitter. People will pile on you. And sure enough, Leaf Nation really let me have it, telling me how stupid I was and that I didn't know anything about hockey, and that Travis Dermott's way better than Sam Bennett, and that why would the Leafs give up a draft pick on top of that I don't know anything that I'm talking about. But it looks like maybe they could get like a do-over on that if that was on the table. I'm sure they would have a different opinion about it now. So let's get back to talking about prospects for Florida Panthers here. I do my top 10 rankings for NHLrumors.com, and in my Florida Panther rankings, number one was a pretty easy one for me. The second place guy was pretty close, and I did this way earlier in the season, so right now I think I would probably reverse him a little bit because the one guy's a Calder candidate and the other's in the American Hockey League. But my number one prospect, and I'm looking long term here, is Spencer Knight. So I think Spencer Knight is a well-known commodity in prospect circles. And I think most people classify him as the best or one of the best prospect goalies in the world right now, with the potential upside of being a all-star franchise number one goaltender. His junior record is spectacular. He's got some international achievements. He was dynamite in the NCAA. And, he's almost supplanted Bobrovsky in the playoffs last year, coming in and outgunning him in the postseason. And it's really hard to come into the NHL as a goalie at that young of an age, and even harder in the playoffs when the pressure is just through the roof. And he bore it well, and he looked right at home there. So I'd like to get your thoughts, Ben, real quick on Spencer Knight overall.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a head scratcher when the Panthers drafted Knight and then went out and signed Bobrovsky to this massive contract.
Right.
So I think that's a key part here of trying to assess Knight's value for fantasy in particular is what's going on with Bobrovsky, because he seems to have finally figured it out. So it seems like this is probably as good a buy low window as you're ever going to have on Spencer Knight, because on paper this year, he doesn't look great. He's played 18 games. He's got a 3.22 GAA, and he's under 900 save percentage. And in the AHL, he actually looks pretty much similar to those in 8 games so far. So if there's some GM out there who is feeling a little shaky on Knight, now would be the time to pounce on him. But like you said, he really is in that elite tier of goalie prospects, with Askarov and Wallstead and those names come to mind. So getting back to Bobrovsky for one sec, this is his third year in Florida now, and all of his stats have improved year over year so far. And he's looking really great. He's looking more like the 2-time Vezina winner that they thought when they were signing him. So the key will be how long is he going to be putting up stats like this? So he's 33 now. There's a couple people have done studies out there, which is kind of interesting. This one user, Garrick16 at hockeygraphs.com. It's a little bit old now. That the study was from 2014, but the conclusions were goalies don't improve as they get older. By age 30, goalie decline starts to get really noticeable. And by the mid 30s, goalies rapidly start to fall apart. So it's not the hugest data set for this, but Bobrovsky's 33, so maybe he's got a couple more years of dominant play, according to historical precedent. But it seems like he's going to be fighting the stats, basically fighting the aging curve here.
Yeah, he's 33 and he's got 4 more seasons after this one at $10 million a season.
Yeah,
that is a monster contract. I was listening to another podcast with my friend Craig Button and Steve Koulias, and they were talking NHL trade rumors, and they like Jake Chikrin to Florida. They think he'd be a perfect fit there. He's from Florida, so on and so forth. And Koulias asked Button, would you do Spencer Knight for Jacob Chychrun. And Button was like, absolutely. Do you think the Florida Panthers would ever entertain the notion of trading Spencer Knight? Because they're a cup contender now. They've got a goalie in Bobrovsky who can help them get that done. He could conceivably be considered to be an expendable asset as long as you got something back that it's not a rental, right? And Chychrun's got a good contract with term on it. So that might be a potential scenario. Would you entertain that notion if you were Florida Panthers?
Ooh, that's a tricky one because Knight's a former first rounder. He's definitely a golden boy, and they're in a really good situation. I mean, they have a situation where Bobrovsky can, as he starts to decline, he can mentor Knight, and Knight can slowly start getting more starts without having all the pressure that he would have if they had to turn to him now. But I mean, I do like some Jacob Chychrun. Like you say, he's a young defender. He's easily number one. If you look at last year for Chychrun as representative of what he's capable of versus what's going on this year, I think he's a really strong defender. So I don't know. I think you're absolutely right. Florida's pushing to win now, and they have a window of at least a few years here. And Chychrun would probably help get them over the top more than Knight would. I'm just not so sure if they have a viable backup behind Bobrovsky if something happened there.
Right. And if you're looking long-term down the pipe in the crease, they traded away Devin Levi to Buffalo in the Sam Reinhart trade. So they gave up their other really good goalie prospect. And so they didn't have really anything else coming down the pipe in goal until they recently signed free agent Mac Guzda. I'm not sure. He's not in the same hemisphere as Spencer Knight, and not even close. But at least he's a prospect. He's only 21 years old. So he's got that going for him. All right. So I had Spencer Knight number one on my list ahead of Anton Lundell. And as the months have gone by here, Spencer Knight's found his way back to the American Hockey League, which I don't have a problem with. I think, he needs to start. Mm-hmm. And if you've got a goalie making $10 million and he's healthy and he's good, then you got to start him, man. Like contractually, you're obligated to do that. He's your veteran. You want to make sure that he's in good form in the playoffs. So I understand that. And Spencer Knight's getting the starts in the American Hockey League. So that works really well for me. And Anton Lundell has remained in the NHL, and he's putting up points, man. He's looking good doing it too. He's what's he got? 40 points now or something to that effect?
Yeah, 60-point pace basically.
Right? And when he was drafted, he was considered to be a good two-way but more defensive forward, right? Like a guy that would be a good number two but a great number three center with offensive upside. And then in his post-draft year, he exploded offensively and started putting up points. So now I think he's a legitimate, a potential number one center and an amazing number two center, like absolutely great second line center. Would you rank them 1-2 the way I have, or would you kind of invert them a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know. I guess if you think about it like in tiers, they're definitely both top tier prospects at different positions. I think Lundell is he's surprising everyone because he was drafted, like you say, as kind of a two-way player, and here he is at the top of the Calder race, putting points on the board regularly. He's been very consistent. Interesting though, because I looked into the Frozen Tools deployment chart, and he has the second worst relative Corsi 4 on the team, which is a little bit surprising. I know he's a rookie, but relative to his teammates, that strong defensive play, at least for now, is not super showing up. But when you look at his line mates, Lundell with Reinhart and Mason Marchment, they are absolutely dominating play. They're at a 61% Corsi 4 right now, which is very impressive. As to whether it's sustainable, it's looking quite sustainable. His individual points percentage is looking good, as in he's involved in points when they're scored when he's on the ice. He's doing all this without getting too many offensive zone starts. And I use hockey prospecting to just get an extra picture on prospects, and they have him ranked as an 81% chance of becoming a star, which is basically scoring at a 57-point pace over his career. So he's looking really good. Like, I would put him up there in the top tier of forward prospects right now.
Mm-hmm. So would you rank him higher than Knight? You go 1-2. What's your 1-2?
Yeah, I might. Just given, I think if Bobrovsky had continued to struggle, Knight would probably be more important for the organization. But I think the way Lundell has been playing, he's probably supplanted Knight for the number 1 spot.
There you go. All right, so the number 3 guy I have on my list is super skilled Grigori Denisenko. This is his second season in North America. Let's just say last season is, with the whole pandemic situation, he played 15 games in the American Hockey League and 7 in the NHL. He had 9 points with Syracuse and 4 points in 7 games in the NHL. This season, he's getting in a regular full sort of season, almost entirely in the American Hockey League. He's played 30 games and he's got 18 points. So the points aren't coming. That's pretty good, man. 20 points basically in 30 games is pretty good. It's the defense that I think is being a bit of a challenge for him to adapt to. He's got the hands, he's got the speed, he's got the vision. He's got some holes in his defensive game. What's your overall assessment of Denisenko? And let's talk about his fantasy projection. How good can he be? How reliable is his translation to the NHL? And how soon do you think we can see him?
Yeah, he's such a tough read. Like, when I first took over the Panthers and was having a look at their prospects, he had been one, obviously, that I'd heard about for years, and he's at the top of their pipeline, former first rounder, but he is not looking great, at least stats wise. His one game with the Panthers this year, you could see the sort of Denisenko flair that people are interested in. He sort of cut to the middle, drove the net, got a really high danger shot, got his own rebound. Like, he's created a whole bunch of commotion in front of the net, and then he didn't score. So there's that skill and intensity and somehow a lack of finishing. And I haven't been watching the AHL games too much, so it's hard to say. But if you look at his stats, I mean, he's at a 50-point pace, which, like you say, is not bad. But this is his second year in the AHL, and there are 8 players ahead of him on the Charlotte Checkers in points per game. Mm-hmm. So it's not like he's even at the top of the AHL team, which, I mean, for a top prospect, that's where I would expect to see them, like, in the top few scoring players of the team. And he's still not there. So my sense is, if he doesn't take a big step forward soon, he's going to risk really falling below the projections that a lot of people have had for him. If it was me in fantasy right now, I would say he still likely has some name value, and it might be wise to explore seeing what you could get back for him. If you could get a comparable player, it might be more viable. I'm not sure he's going to really turn out to be a top line talent at this point.
All right. So trending down. Would you still rank him in the top 5 of Florida Panthers prospects, let alone 3rd overall?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the thing about him is he does seem to have so much skill. Like, when you watch him play, I was watching sort of a compilation of a bunch of the goals that he scored last year in the AHL, and they're mostly like sniped shots from high danger areas. So he does bring a lot of intangibles to a team, and I would tend to gamble on him more than other prospects that they have in the system, just because he has the pedigree. He clearly has the skill, and the one area he's shined in his career so far is in international tournaments. So I think he spent a lot of his junior career playing a little bit over his age group. Like, he hit the KHL when he was only 19, And so his KHL production doesn't look good. And then he came to the AHL when he's pretty young, and that's also a very high league. And so the fact that he hasn't done much yet, there could still be some wiggle room. So I'd keep him in the top 5. But I'd be nervous.
Yeah, well, I've never actually been as big a fan as some of the other prospect experts or scouty guys are on him. I see the skill, but at the same time, you want to see the consistency, and you want to see the intensity and the compete level and the defensive responsibility. You'd be the most skilled player in the world, but if you don't compete hard and play good defensively, no coach in the NHL is going to play you. Look at Josh Hosang. I think that's one of his challenges is, he can be pretty lazy sometimes, but you'd be hard pressed to find too many players that can match him in what he can do with the puck with his dangles and just how fluid of a skater he is. So that's my third, Grigori Denisenko. Number 4, I have Finnish forward Aleksi Heponiemi. So Heponiemi was drafted in the second round of the 2017 draft, making him 23 years old now. So the clock's kind of ticking on this. And I don't think you'll find too many players that have more of a volatile stock level than Heponiemi has. I mean, drafted as a second round, his stock was okay, but not great. And then he has this monster season in his D+1 year where he has, about 2 points a game, 118 points in 57 games with the Swift Current Broncos in the WHL, right? Goes to the World Juniors with Finland, looks good there, goes to play pro the following season, D+2 in the Liga with Karpat, has 46 points in 50 games, right? And has 9 points in 7 games in the World Junior with Finland that year. Like stock through the roof. We're talking top 10 first round draft kind of talent here, right? Signs his ELC, comes over to North America and plays 49 games in the 1920 season with Springfield and lays an egg, 14 points. Stock goes to the bottom. Starts the lockout season last year on loan in Hockey Allsvenskan with Modo, point a game player there. All right, good. Comes back over to North America, has 6 points in 6 games in the American Hockey League, but only 2 points in 9 games in the NHL. So kind of, all right, what do we got here? Is this a real talented player or not? And then this season, 24 points in 35 games so far in the American Hockey League. So even less impressive than Denisenko's stats. So now we're trending back down in the opposite direction again. Up, down, up, down, up, down. Talk about a volatile asset. Would the real Heponiemi please stand up?
Yeah, he has a bonkers development curve. Like talking about NHL equivalency, NHLE, he went from a 51 to a 38 to a 14. And I think the 14 was that year you mentioned that he left Europe and came to the AHL. I think with Heponiemi, you have to talk about his size. I know the NHL is shifting towards, you can be a smaller dynamic player. And I think he does have the skating and the skill set. But his NHL profile still has him listed at 5'10", but 155 pounds. So I'm not sure how recent that is, but that is light for the NHL. And I've read some observers who noticed that when he did come over from Europe and he ran into pro defenders in the AHL, he was getting pushed around and knocked off the puck and had a little bit less space to play his passing game. So I think that's a concern, but he does slowly seem to be figuring it out at the pro level. His stats this year are decent. He's third on the checkers, so he's looking a little bit better than Denisenko is to some extent. And in only 6 games, AHL games last year, he had 6 assists. But at the same time, he's 23 years old already, and how long is it going to take him? He also red flags for fantasy. He doesn't really shoot much. I think that's something to consider when you're stocking your fantasy team. He might have good points upside, but if most of his points are assists, which has been the case for Heponiemi, he's not going to be bringing shots. And I don't think Heponiemi is the kind of player that's going to be bringing hits either. Whereas Denisenko, with that physical edge, I think he's more likely to at least be a hit per game, for example. So he's not a major, you're not losing out in that category rostering him. But I think on one hand, I'm excited about Heponiemi because I think he's totally fits the profile of a post-hype sleeper. He was really hyped a few years ago, and I think most people have moved on from him. So he's likely available for pretty cheap in your leagues, and he's a decent stash. But I would be a little bit hesitant to roster him because of those concerns.
Yeah, his height doesn't concern me at all, right? Like I don't.
Yeah, right.
I don't. It's not that I don't care if you're how tall you are or how short you are, because there's definitely advantages to being taller, right? You have longer reach and whatnot, especially if you're a defenseman. But at his height, that's fine. But you just need to be strong and smart enough to keep your head up and avoid getting annihilated, and strong enough that you can not be pushed over and protect the puck and shield the puck using your strength if you don't have the raw size. So I'm not worried about his height, but the fact that he's less than 160 pounds is concerning, right? Like I don't care how strong you are. If you're 5 foot, what is he, 5'10", 160 maybe, if we're lucky.
Yeah,
that's pretty frail for the NHL, and it's going to be hard for him to avoid injuries and be impactful. You're right, he's not much of a shooter. He's a playmaker. So if he's not shooting and generating offense that way, and he's not playing a physical grindy game, if he's not scoring, he's not doing anything, right? So he's got to be an assist machine, or it's an assist machine or nothing with this guy. But the good news for him is he's got slick hands, makes super saucy, sweet passes, and he's pretty smart too, right? Like he sees the ice and reads the play really well. So I'm not saying it's impossible. I do have him ranked 4th, but he's a volatile commodity. So selling him now, I guess it makes sense. You do run the risk that the stock goes back up, and you might be selling low. So this might be a good buy low opportunity for him. And if you do buy him, he's 23 years old. So I don't think you'll have to wait long to see if you have bought wisely or not. Okay. So that's my top 4: Spencer Knight, Anton Lundell, Grigori Denisenko, and Aleksi Heponiemi. Coming in at number 5. And this is a guy who I probably want to have higher. Mackie Samoskevich, Florida Panthers, first round pick from 2021, 24th overall, 5'11", 192. So not a huge guy, but at least he's got some weight. And this is a player that I really like. He's another highly skilled player. Came from the USHL, Chicago Steel, one of the dominant team in the USHL. Point a game player there. He's in his freshman season in the NCAA at University of Michigan. Last time I looked, they were pretty good, have a deep roster, and he's got 24 points in 34 games there, and was named to the American World Junior roster. So I'm sure we'll see him back there in August when the tournament resumes. This is a player I really like. I think he's got a really good chance at being an impactful fantasy player when he makes it to the NHL. He's 19 years old. That could be in a couple of years still, though. Your take, Ben.
Yeah, just had a thought about what you said there about the AHL and the timeline. The longer I play fantasy and play dynasty and keeper leagues, I've been slowly gravitating more to players who are in the AHL and showing that they're doing well in the AHL, just because the timeline's shorter, So if you can see someone like Heponiemi is doing like pretty well in the AHL versus Samoskevich, he's doing pretty well in college, I would probably lean more towards the AHL guy, Samoskevich, yeah, I mean, I think one thing to take into account here is that he's on that stacked Michigan team. So his deployment is not going to be very favorable. So 24 points in 33 games. I think a lot of other top prospects in college are, more to like a point a game or over a point per game. So to me, it's a little bit disappointing to see that level of production, but I think that's the grain of salt you have to take that with. Next year, I imagine Owen Power, Brendan Brisson, Thomas Bordelot, maybe Matty Beniers are all going to move on to probably the AHL. And that's going to be really interesting to watch what Samoskevich does with that. I think he'll have to take a big step forward next year, and I would want to see point per game from him to keep his trajectory looking good. I know going into the World Juniors, he made Team USA, and he was actually slated for the top line. So it was looking really good, but obviously it was canceled. So hopefully we see him. I think they got rescheduled to August, right? So hopefully we see him on Team USA and kind of get a better picture of what he's capable of then.
All right, so that rounds out the top five. Just outside the top five, I go with my first defenseman of the list, and that is Michael Benning.
Right.
So, it's maybe a little concerning that we're outside of the top five and we get our first defenseman prospect. And this guy is a 2020 fourth round pick. So, a little lacking in draft pedigree. Drafted in, when I say 2020, yep. So out of the AJHL. So I think that was one strike against him on his draft profile. The other strike against him is he's undersized. He's 5'9", 175. So he was probably even smaller and lighter than that when he was drafted a couple of years ago. Since his draft, however, he's in his sophomore season at the NCAA. Last year, he was limited to just 21 games, no doubt because of COVID, 11 points. This season, however, at University of Denver, pretty good program there, he's got 13 goals and 27 points in 32 games. So this is starting to look like an example of a draft size bias where he was overlooked due to size, similar to, Sam Girard or Alex DeBrincat and so on and so forth. But he's got NHL bloodlines, being a Benning, and he's got a nice, quick first step. I like the fact that he can close space real quick, finds loose pucks, changes his pace. I think that's a really valuable asset to have. You can, catch up with players, close gaps on them, create separation. And obviously he's got some good offensive vision. His defensive game doesn't seem to be too big of a liability either. So this could look like, a good later round value pick by the Florida Panthers here. What's your take on Michael Benning?
Yeah, I think Florida really found a later round gem here, possibly because of the height bias, as you say. I would say he's Florida's highest upside prospect on the back end. So he kind of makes sense here around 6. And I think he could move higher. I think, like you say, the AJHL it's a tricky league to read, even for stat projection models. There just aren't the same. There isn't the same volume of players to come out of the AJHL and have long careers to assess, how likely that is for a player who can produce at a certain level. So, in hockey prospecting, he's got 6% star potential right now, which is not great. But I think part of that is related to his junior leagues. They have comparables for him as Vince Dunn and Nick Leddy, which sounds about right. That's a player that can put up 40 plus points and run a power play. And he's on a really strong team right now at the U of Denver. They've got Sean Behrens, who's a point per game as a defender. They've got Bobby Brink, Carter Savoy, a couple other players. And he's doing really well. He's making Florida look good. He's second nationally in goal scoring by defensemen behind Luke Hughes right now, which I was a bit surprised to see. Matthew Coronado, who the Flames took in last year's draft, he has as many goals as Michael Benning does. So I mean, Matt Coronado went almost a goal per game in his draft year. So that's, I mean, it's pretty impressive what Benning's doing here. And like you say, I don't think he's a liability defensively. I know he plays a lot on the penalty kill for Denver. He gets a lot of block shots for them, and it seems like he comes up clutch for them in close games. So when they're behind, he'll help. He'll do what's necessary and kind of elevate his play to get them over the hump. He was, I think last week he was named Player of the Week, like Defenseman of the Week in their college division.
Yeah, and despite the fact that he's not a banger, and he's undersized kind of guy, but he'll still play a physical game. He'll initiate contact and he'll rub elbows with guys that are bigger than him, and his board play is good as well. So, not too many holes in his game. I think he just needs a little bit of time, confidence, and seasoning. And when he turns pro, that'll be a really good indication of, is he a for real top 4 NHL caliber defenseman? I think the potential for top 4 is there. I mean, we're not saying he's going to be a franchise player here. He's the 6th ranked prospect on my list, but I think if you can get a guy that's a top 4 pairing drafted in whatever round he was, the 4th, that's good, man. That's real good.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So another defenseman comes in my list at number 7, and that is John Ludvig. So he's 6'1", 214, drafted 2019 3rd round. So drafted in 2019 from the Portland Winterhawks, a season where he had 18 points in 58 games and 77 penalty minutes. So drafted for his size and defensive game and physicality. Returns draft post 1 season to the WHL, wears the C for Portland, and puts up 17 goals and 62 points in 60 games. So all of a sudden, he goes to a point-a-game player. His penalty minutes come down a little bit, probably because he's just too valuable on the ice to be in the box for Portland. So his stock takes a big spike. Last season, he turns pro, limited to just 13 games in the American Hockey League, but he did score 8 points in his 13 games, which is pretty good for a rookie defenseman. Injury cut his season short, and he hasn't played at all this year. So, so far in the last 2 years, he's played a total of 13 games, and that is a lot of lost development time for a player in his very early 20s. So that's a huge red flag there. But, you draft a defenseman because he's big, he's strong, he's physical, he's mean. He skates really well for, a player his size, which I hate that saying. And then lo and behold, he develops an offensive upside to his game too. So, the file just keeps getting better for this guy. Later draft pick, 3rd round, 69th overall. Are you concerned about the loss of time he has here? How impressed are you with his offensive development, albeit at 19, his 4th season in the OHL? It's expected that you have your career year, but he took such a huge jump. What's your fantasy value on John Ludvig?
Yeah, it seems like another solid pick by Ludvig in the later rounds here, or by Florida, in the later rounds here. And he's pretty intriguing. Like, I can't help but like this guy. The initial reading that we had here at Dobber was that he was sort of a meat and potatoes kind of grinding defenseman. And then right after, like you say, in his draft 1 year, he just showed that he has this defensive gear as well. And his first foray into the AHL was great. And now, unfortunately, he's just lost this whole year. So I think it's going to be hard to tell how it affects him until he gets back and starts seeing minutes again. But I think he could come in and be, a 2nd pairing, 3rd pairing defenseman with some upside. And for fantasy, I think he could be a sneaky strong multi-cat option, because playing on Florida, this version of the Florida team, he's going to have good plus minus. I think this is a player that's going to bring hits and blocks to the table. And then if he somehow gets some power play time, he could provide some offense too. So he seems like one of these all situations defenders that coaches really love to play. I know he ended up in the top 4 for the Checkers pretty quickly. And one thing to keep in mind for the Checkers and Florida's AHL prospects in general is that they've been sharing teams. So last year they shared an affiliate with the Lightning, and this year they're sharing their affiliate with Seattle. So I don't super know the situation there, but it seems a little unfortunate because, you have all of Seattle's prospects playing on the same team and they're all jockeying for ice time. Hopefully next year, Seattle gets their own team and Florida can have its own AHL affiliate. Because I imagine people get more opportunity that way.
Yeah, sharing an affiliated team is always a concern. Last year, it was due to pandemic reasons. This year, it's just because Seattle doesn't have a home for their franchise yet. But that'll be starting in next season. So their rink will be ready to go for next season. So, yeah. And it's not so bad right now for the Florida's team there. And I think they're in Charlotte because Seattle just doesn't have that many prospects.
Yeah, they really don't.
Right. They've had one draft. So those guys are, for the most part, all still in junior. And so they've signed a few free agents. That's about it, though, man. Like I'm working on their top 10 right now for NHLrumor.com, and it's lean. It's very lean.
Yeah, it's grim.
Okay, yeah. So I think you're right on though about Ludvig. If you're in a really deep league that is a head-to-head that has the rotisserie stat style, he likes to shoot. He's got a hard shot, so he'll generate some offense for you that way. He's big and he's a little bit physical, so he'll definitely get you some penalty minutes. He'll definitely throw some hits, and because he's not going to be a top pairing defenseman, he's going to have to block shots too. So he's going to check a whole bunch of stat columns for you there. He's not going to win you many faceoffs, but other than that, he should be pretty good. So number 8 on my list now. I'm going back up front, forward, and taking 2020 third round selection, 74th overall center Ty Smilanic. 6'1", so he's not too short, but he's definitely slight at 174. But despite that, he plays a pretty aggressive game. I mean, he's not physical in the sense that he racks up the penalty minutes. He takes a few, but he's just got a motor and a hard Charlie Hustle style compete level. And I really like that. He's a sophomore in the NCAA right now with Quinnipiac. Last year was his freshman season, of course, 21 points in 29 games and 21 points in 36 games this year. And he was a American World Junior roster player as well. Didn't play in the one game that they played. So I guess he's a bubble player. We'll see where he slots in with the World Junior roster in August when they resume again, and that'll be fun. So this is a player that I think has a good chance to play in the NHL because I think he will be someone that the coaches will trust, but I don't see him having a very high offensive upside. Looking at him as a ceiling as a third line player, but with the offensive upside enough that he could be slotted up for short stints due to injury or cold streaks or whatever. As a substitute top 6 in small sample sizes for a short term. That's my take on Ty. Where do you see him in their depth chart?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds right. Hockey Prospecting has comparables for him: Victor Rask, Kasperi Kapanen, Mason Raymond. And I would imagine he's a little bit closer to the Victor Rask side of things than the Mason Raymond. But third line guy that can move up when necessary. Specifically, Smilanic has been known for his goal scoring. It's encouraging sign that he made Team USA. I mean, they have a lot of options, and he made the cut. Apparently, he was injured in a pre-tournament game by Red Savage, so that's unfortunate. I mean, the tournament ended up being canceled, but it would have been interesting to see what he did with that. I got a little bit Denisenko vibes when I was looking into his stats for this, because he's slumping this year. He had 21 points in 29 games last year for the same team, and now he has 21 points in an extra 7 games. and that's 6th on the team. So especially for fantasy, unless you're in super deep leagues, I love to see prospects that are, getting a decent percentage of their teams, like teams' points. I'm thinking about like Luke Evangelista in I think London in the OHL right now. He's almost 2 points per game, and he's scoring like 45% of the team's points. So that shows to me he's got the team on his back, and he's really able to carry it by himself. But Smilanic being 6th on the team in points means he's not really that top line talented leader, even in the second year of college. So it is a little concerning in terms of looking at his upside. But I agree. I think he's going to make the NHL. I think he's going to be a useful player. One highlight that I saw from him this year is a little bit like that famous Ovechkin goal from Ovechkin's rookie year. He gets knocked down by a defender, and he's almost falling down, and he just managed to poke it through the goalie. So it's a really cool goal if you can check it out on Twitter. But he's got some spunk.
Yeah, that Ovechkin goal. I know the one you're talking about, where he's on his backside and he like reaches around behind him and tucked it in. That was amazing. Yeah. Never say die. All right, so that is number 8, rounding out my top 10 almost here. We're going number 9. I'm going back to the blue line with Max Gildon. So this is a player who's got way more NHL value than fantasy value. Big defenseman, 6'3", 194 from Texas, drafted in the 3rd round of 17 draft. Played NCAA for 3 seasons. Had some pretty good offensive points there. 23 and 36 in his first season. 21 and 31 as a sophomore. Only played 3 seasons. In his junior season, he was almost a point a game player, 29 points and 34. Last year, he was loaned to Bakersfield because Florida's team didn't play. But he had 19 points in 32 games there. This season, the offense has bottomed out. 5 points in 22 games, 1 goal, 4 assists. So he's a physical defenseman, and I think he's going to be a defensive defenseman. I think he's going to play in the NHL, but I don't think he's going to score you a lot of points when he gets there, but he will give you a lot of hits and blocks. Do you think I'm underestimating his offensive upside?
No, again, when I took over the team for Dobber, I was thinking about Max Gildon as the top defensive prospect, but it seems like at the NHL level, I wouldn't be surprised if he has a lower offensive ceiling than Ludvig, let alone Benning. Mm-hmm. It's very concerning to see his production down the way it is. It makes me wonder what's going on with him. He definitely seems to be regressing, especially as a defenseman known at junior levels for his offense. As a college junior, for example, he was close to a point per game, and he had a decent rookie season as well. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with him. They've been very patient with him. He's 22, 23 years old. So it'd be good to see him push to make a jump pretty soon. Otherwise, I wouldn't be surprised if he starts getting passed up on the depth chart by Benning and Ludvig and maybe others.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive potential is there, but I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's upside that, that suggests that it's coming. I'm not convinced that he'll be an offensive contributor at the NHL, but I think he's got a very good chance of playing in the NHL because as a shutdown defenseman, because his skating is good, but not great. It's not a liability, right? And he's got the size and can make the nice outlet passes. He can initiate the transition, maybe not lead the rush or run a power play, but that's okay, right? I think he's good enough to play in the NHL. We'll see if he makes it or not. And then rounding out my top 10 is a super hot take here, I think. Olli Juolevi. Right. So is Olli Juolevi a bust? Vancouver fans will say, yeah. Duh. So he's a first round draft pick, selected 5th overall by the Vancouver Canucks. So a lot of draft pedigree capital was spent on Olli Juolevi. And if you're looking at expectations for him as a 5th overall draft pick, yes, he's absolutely a bust. However, I would argue that he still has, if you eliminate where he was drafted, take that out of the equation, say he was signed as a free agent or drafted in the 5th round. Okay, yeah, let's talk about this guy. I think he's definitely a talented player. He can skate well and he can create transition. He can carry the puck up the ice. He can run a power play. He's just, he's got some flaws in his game, to be sure. But if you just take away where the value of what your expectations are for where he was drafted, and then just look at the skill sets that he brings to the game. I'm not saying that he's going to be a number 1 or 2 pairing defenseman. I'm saying he's going to be a bottom pairing defenseman with an NHL career, albeit a short one. Like, he's not going to play in his 40s. But I think you can milk some value out of this asset if you're the Florida Panthers, I believe. Have you given up all hope on Juolevi, or do you think that the Florida Panthers can get something out of this?
Yeah, I think I'm closer to having given up all hope on him. Although I like the move. Like, it was I think of it as a bit of a Chicago move by Florida acquiring him, as in, they got Borgstrom, they got Nylander. They've taken on these sort of like post-hype, high pedigree picks that haven't seemed to be panning out. And why not? I mean, he was very cheap to acquire. Of course, he was taken ahead of, Matthew Tkachuk, Keller, Sergachev, Charlie McAvoy, Jacob Chikrin. So it's never going to look good. But like you say, they didn't have to give up much to get him. So far this year, he was injured in late January, and since he returned, he's been healthy scratched. He played 12 minutes the other night in the loss to Columbus, but no points in 10 games. He's playing a sheltered role. He's not really getting like totally blown up in terms of play driving, but he's not driving play either. So I think best case for Juolevi would be like looking at his past production in the OHL and whatnot, maybe a shot and a hit per game and pushing 40 points. I think 40 points would probably be like the absolute upside. And I wouldn't bet on him reaching it, but if that would be rosterable in your league, then, you could go for it. But I would say he's not even, probably other players would be more worth your time.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I'm not advocating that you run out and try and acquire Juolevi at his high low as a guy that's going to make an impact on your fantasy team. I'm just saying I'm not convinced that he's a flat out 100% bust and he's not going to play more than 4 more games in his entire career in the NHL. I think he's got some work cut out for him to crack the roster, but we've seen this show before for some players where they get a change of scenery, and he's got that now in Florida this season. Hasn't been given much of a chance here yet. There was an injury there, so that's and it's a tough roster to crack too, right? Like, they're a Stanley Cup contender, so he's got his work cut out for him to crack the roster. But if circumstances break correctly for him and he gets an opportunity, I'm saying I have not given up on the file. I don't think there's a huge upside there, but I'm not saying it's a total piece of garbage either. Yeah.
I think it's just important to remember that the Panthers they're all in right now. Like, would they consider moving Knight for Chikrin? Like, possibly, because they're trying to go all in. I think on a different team, you'd probably see Denisenko getting a longer look. Owen Tippett just got sent down. And these are high pedigree players, and they're not getting the opportunity with this team. So Juolevi might be falling into that category too.
All right, so that rounds out my top 10. Spencer Knight, Anton Lundell, Grigori Denisenko, Aleksi Heponiemi, Mackie Samoskevich, Michael Benning, John Ludvig, Ty Smilanic, Max Gildon, and last but not least, Olli Juolevi. Overall, Ben, you like my rankings? Is there a player there you think I think maybe you could you could swap in and out for, maybe minus Juolevi and add someone else?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bit of a soft spot for Logan Hutsko. He was a third round pick back in 2018. He's had a lot of injury problems in his short career, but he's one of the leading scorers on their AHL team. He made a big impression in training camp back in September, and I'm curious to see what he can do. I have a feeling like he's going to make the team probably next year, and there might be some upside there.
Right. Another player he's a player I gave real strong consideration to for the top 10. The next guy that was probably as close to making it would be Justin Sourdif, playing with the Edmonton Oil Kings now. I believe he was a trade acquisition by them, and he's having a monster season in the WHL in what's probably his final season of junior. He's had a really nice steady development curve, getting better and better and better. He's a little undersized, but he plays a power game, and it'd be interesting to see what he does when he turns pro. Aleksi Saarela is another player that was close on my list, former Carolina Hurricanes prospect, so very familiar with Charlotte. He's bounced through a couple organizations, but he's had a pretty solid career so far. He's 24 years old, so he's getting a little bit old for prospect consideration. One more year to go, basically, before he ages out of my rankings. What's your take on those two guys?
Yeah, I think Sourdif was going to be interesting to watch again at the World Juniors. So maybe we'll get to see what he does in August. But I think he was going to be part of like this pretty physical checking third line for Canada in the projections. So I imagine that's how he would slot in eventually with the Panthers, is like a really solid checking forward. So that's valuable in certain ways for fantasy, especially in multicat. His offense is solid at the WHL level, but this is his fourth year in the WHL. So in terms of pure upside, I would hope to see a little bit more. He's 21 points in 15 games for the Oil Kings. Solid, but yeah, I wonder if for fantasy he'll more be like a multi-cat asset when he makes the jump. I'm sorry, I'm blanking. Who was the other one?
Aleksi Saarela.
Oh yeah, Aleksi Saarela. Yeah, he's been looking so good. He's one of these players that sometimes you see the stats of some of the players in the AHL, and it's not really clear why they're not making the jump. I imagine he decided to sign in Europe because he saw kind of like the log jam that Florida has going on, and he wanted to get some playing time. It's just not clear at this moment whether he's going to come back to North America. Is he going to sign with a different team? I think his stocks would go up if he were to sign elsewhere, just in terms of opportunity. But I think he would be a really intriguing player to keep your eye on, especially for fantasy, like scoring. I think he could come in and be a surprisingly successful in the NHL, especially if he signed elsewhere.
Yeah, another guy I really think has some maybe good sleeper under the radar value that's not getting a lot of buzz is Matt Kiersted. 23-year-old defenseman, undrafted, signed as a college free agent, played 4 seasons at North Dakota, so knows how to win. Wore the A for his final 2 seasons there. Was pretty much a point-a-game player for his junior, senior seasons, and this is his first full season as a pro, and he's made his NHL debut already. He's got 2 points in 8 games with Florida, and obviously 42 games in the AHL with 15 points there. So looks like he's transitioned really nicely to pro hockey, and he could be in short order a player who is on the roster in Florida. And, like I said, he played 4 seasons of college, so he's already 23 years old. So you know what you got there. And he's only 3% owned on Fantrax. So there's a lot of ownership availability for him. 6'1", 180. doesn't shy away from the physical game, but he's not a banger. But in 42 games, he's got 34 penalty minutes in the American Hockey League this year, and he had seasons of 50 in NCAA. So not shy that way. Do you have much of a scouting file on Matt Kiersted?
Yeah, no, I'm not that familiar with him yet, but he does have a feel like a lot of these Panthers prospects where they're not the shiniest player perhaps, but they really do have some solid depth coming up the pipeline. So, you have the higher upside prospects at the top that are already starting to fit into the top 6, like Lundell. You have Denisenko, Tippett still in the system, and these are players that can be providing the offense. And then I think they're going to get a lot of depth out of a lot of these players, like, Kiersted stepping in and Benning and Ludvig.
Yeah, and the fact that, we're convinced that 2 of the top 4 prospects on my list here are guys that are questionable, if not flat out trending down, and Denisenko and Heponiemi, right? So Florida's got a pretty young roster, and they've got some recent graduates up there. So it's a hard roster to crack, but it's not necessarily an impossible prospect depth chart to move up the rankings in. And, it gives Florida some trade chip options as well if they're looking at doing anything at the trade deadline this year.
I think Owen Tippett is an interesting one too. Like, I wonder if they'll be considering dangling him, given that he was just sent down to the AHL now. Yeah. I mean, he again, he's a former, I think he was a first rounder. He's only 23 years old. He just hasn't really seemed to light it up yet. He reminds me a little bit of Eli Tolvanen over in Nashville. They're about 100 games into their NHL career. They were renowned for their goal scoring in junior. I think especially in the OHL, Tippett had some really good runs with goal scoring, but he's not really lighting it up yet. And he's more of a peripheral guy for fantasy so far, like 1.7 shots and 1.5 hits a game so far in 12 and a half minutes. But I wonder if they might consider moving someone like Tippett to bring back someone who'd help more now.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, they're tinkering with their roster now, signing some free agent prospects. Petteri Lindbaum is a player that they've signed as a free agent. He had a little bit of an NHL career previously. Let me just bring him up, but he became relevant again playing in the Olympics, with Finland helping them win the gold medal. Playing in the KHL this season. He's had cups of coffee in the NHL with St. Louis, and then playing in the American Hockey League with Chicago. So, he's been over here before, left to go play in Switzerland, and this year was in the KHL, but that season's over now, and Jokerit withdrew from the KHL with what's going on in the war there, right? So it'd be interesting to see if he plays for Florida later on in the season in the playoffs. Not a lot of fantasy value on this file. He's a defenseman who at best will get you some block shots. And the other free agent they signed is a junior goalie, Mac Guzda, overage goalie in the OHL, having a pretty good season there. And there was a lot of free agent interest in buzz in this player. I think his name even came up on the 32 Thoughts podcast before he was, or when he was signed as well. So yeah, that's interesting, right? It gives them another goalie option in the system as well.
Yeah, well, the Panthers seem to be really skilled at developing these players that get overlooked by other teams. like 26-year-olds that all of a sudden turn into top line talents. So who's to say what comes next? I think Guzda is interesting because if Knight keeps playing down at the AHL for a little bit, I'm not sure Jonas Johansson's going to cut it in the backup role. So there's a little bit of an opening there, especially for a contender.
You got to think that when the playoff time comes, that Spencer Knight's going to be, if he's not the backup goalie, he'll be a black ace though, right? Like he's got to be.
Yeah, for sure.
And that if something happens with Bob, that that Knight would just leapfrog and go right into the starting position.
For sure, yeah. Goalies explode all the time, so you never know.
Yeah, I'd have to think so. And as a fantasy owner of Spencer Knight, I'm really hoping that he wins that job sooner than later.
Yeah, that's a long contract he's battling there.
Yes, it is, but he can do it. I'm confident.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, Ben Gehrels, thanks very much for joining me on the podcast. The journey writer on Dobber Hockey, the prospect coverage for both the teams in Florida, the Florida Panthers and Tampa Bay Lightning. Follow Ben on Twitter at BGare, at BEEGARE, and you can follow his other Twitter handle at Ferengi Hockey. Tell me a little bit about that, man.
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to get into writing about fantasy and this whole world, and didn't really know where to start, and just had a crazy idea to apply the Ferengi rules of acquisition to fantasy hockey, because they're not that far removed, as absurd as it sounds. Fantasy hockey owners have to be pretty ruthless. You try and find any little edge you can to sneak good assets away from competitors. And so it's kind of funny, looking through all the crazy rules of acquisition, and then applying them to things that, insights that I'm seeing. Are you a Star Trek fan yourself?
I was just gonna say, for anyone that's listening to this show that's not a not a nerd, that's totally a Star Trek reference. And yeah, I totally get it. I'm a nerd, big time. Star Trek, Star Wars, sign me up for both. I'm in.
Yeah, the Ferengis are all just about commerce and, acquiring wealth. And I think that's exactly the same with fantasy owners.
It's a bridge I would have never connected, but I gotta say, I really like it. I think it's fascinating.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's been my pleasure, man. I'll have to get you back on when we work my way through the alphabet and get down to the Tampa Bay Lightning, which will probably be sometime this summer at the rate I'm going.
That sounds good.
All right. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. If you enjoy the show, throw me a bone, give me a review, maybe share the episode on social media. Give me a 5-star review. Tell me what you want to hear on the shows. Tell me what you don't like. Make fun of me about how many times I say or and so on and so forth. All right, that's it for this episode. We'll be coming up next with the Los Angeles Kings top prospects. Till then, keep your stick on the ice.